Doug Betts. Doug, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name's Doug, and I work as an HR consultant where I run a business that helps business leaders and managers be the best versions of themselves and prevent a lot of problems happening essentially by coaching them and advising them and helping them through sort of typical things that they'll encounter on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. How did you end up in the HR world, Doug?
So it all started over 20 years ago, and it came from a place where I started a new job and I was trained very well in it for 2 weeks. And then I was told to forget all that. I was going to be doing something completely different. And as a result of that, I stumbled through it, got there through trial and error, and came out the other side all right. But what really frustrated me at the time was I thought, well, all of that could have been really well avoided if I'd been trained properly and coached. And it sort of set me up to think about what I wanted to do as a career and how I could help people in the best way that I knew how. And I knew I didn't want to be a classroom teacher with kids, but I thought, well, I could do something about coaching and training adults. And therefore, I chose HR as a profession. And over the years, I've got kind of distracted by some of the other things that comes under the HR umbrella as well that I found I've really enjoyable to work with. But mainly, I sort of came back to this training aspect in more recent years and thought, actually, let's work on prevention, not cure, because so many of our workplaces in the UK are in absolute chaos. I see it as an issue, but it's really then trying to work with business owners and managers to try and break the normal habits and cycles that they follow or a workplace will typically follow and think, well, what can we do to actually make the experience better for managers, business owners, and also employees who are on the receiving end of this stuff. So, for me, I'm a logical person. I like to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think, if what happened to me 20 years ago had been done differently, they could have got a much better result out of me and I might have hung around a bit longer than I actually did.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think there's a lot of that going around, and any employee really just wants to have something to buy into, don't they? They want to know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and have that some sort of purpose and direction with their career.
Exactly. And I think now even more so, people actually want work that's meaningful and gives value and is quite often something that's in line with their own values and beliefs as well. Because I think, you spend a lot of your time at work in your life. So let's see what you can do to make it enjoyable. And fundamentally, people want to be able to solve problems and they want to be able to feel they're making a positive difference in whatever they choose to do.
Yeah, definitely. So you work with a lot of businesses. Do you work with individuals, or is it the businesses that approach you for that support?
So it's businesses that approach me for the support. So in terms of this, I mean, when it comes to my leadership coaching, I do work business to customer as well. So I can be approached by private individuals for the coaching side. As an HR person, legally, my insurance only covers me to advise businesses. So what I can never do is be a pseudo employment lawyer or trade union rep and advise employees on that front. But that said, if employees work for a business and the business gives their consent for them to approach me, they can do in terms of sort of any questions or queries they've got, which has often worked that way when I've been in in-house roles as well as when I've done consulting. But predominantly, I will support business owners. But as an HR person, we have a fine line. We have to keep the business compliant, out of trouble, and support them, but also we have to look out for the employees as well and make sure that we're acting legally in accordance with the law and trying to do the right thing by them too. So it's a tricky balancing act sometimes.
Yeah. The businesses that you work with, do they have their own HR, a lot of them, or have a lot of them just not even reached that point yet, and they're struggling? Because as a small business owner, especially, I imagine that transition when you start getting more and more employees building a team, that transition from maybe small to medium-sized business can be really difficult for them.
It really can, which is why I like to work with them to start with to get the fundamentals in place so they're not growing rapidly and still behaving like they're a startup in a back bedroom. But to answer your question, predominantly I work with businesses that don't have their own HR because obviously it's more economical for somebody like me to work for them as a contractor. So I'm there when they need me, but I'm not on their payroll full time because they don't need me full time. So that works for them, works for me because it keeps it interesting for me because I enjoy the variety of the work I do in the businesses that I work with. But I think also I have been known to sometimes work alongside existing HR teams in larger corporates, particularly if I've got a skill set that they haven't, or they need an extra pair of hands to do a project. So that's worked quite well for me as well. But predominantly all my focus and my sort of my marketing messages I put out there are sort of aimed at business owners who've perhaps got 5 to 50 employees and no HR, and they need to know that they've got somebody they can approach if they need help in that area.
Yeah, and how do you find the businesses or the employees within the businesses, at least? Are they quite receptive, or are they a bit reluctant at the start with, because I've worked in HR myself in the past, and I think a lot of people can see it as unnecessary red tape and nonsense. So that's how a lot of people can perceive it on times.
You're right, and this is why it's a huge barrier I have to try and break down and show the value of. So I do it by not coming in with the old-fashioned perception of the waggy finger and being the police. I don't see it as red tape because actually I don't do things if they're not necessary, but I will do things that absolutely are necessary to keep somebody out of trouble. So for me, if I can stop my clients getting sued, I've done my job well, because sometimes they might do it by mistake. They might think they're doing the right thing, but actually they're landing themselves in all sorts of hot water by saying things to their employees that they really shouldn't be, or they've got things which are going on which are illegal. And for me, I choose who I work with, so I will only work with ethical clients rather than those that want to cut corners and not do the right thing by people. So yeah, I have to do a real sell to move past people's perceptions of what they think HR is, because it goes well beyond the hiring and firing side. And I genuinely believe if I'm used properly and people tell me what's going on in their business, I can really add the value. I can create a great employee experience. And I can help people stay so they don't run off to the competition and then cause the business headaches and loss of revenue and money trying to recover some of that by training somebody else. So I think this is where I add the most value to a business, and about being strategic as well as doing that, the operational hands-on stuff. But I think sadly for a lot of businesses, they think they can Google the answer. They think it can be done by the finance director, the ops director, who doesn't have that specialism. And it's usually the ones who approach me to get them out of trouble because they've tried to do it that way and they've found out it doesn't work, and they actually need a professional support. Because I think so much of what I do now is also about understanding human psychology and how the brain works. And because I've done that, I know how to get the best out of people. So I can give managers tips and hints to say, if you say the phrase or say what you need to say in this way, you're likely to get a better result than if you say it the way you were going to say it. So I think there's a lot more nuances than people would originally think. And yeah, I'm doing all I can to sort of say it is not an admin function. We shouldn't be organising your Christmas party. There's so many other things that we really should be doing to help you as a business thrive.
Yeah, and I think a lot of small businesses and businesses that start up, usually the person that starts it is good at what they do. So that's why they start the business, but they're not necessarily managers. They not necessarily have any experience in HR or employment law or anything like that. So it's a massive transition for them when they are managing this staff and trying to adapt and grow that business. So I can imagine it's quite difficult, and it takes quite a lot of educating on your part to help them understand what they need to be doing and where they're going.
Exactly. And I think the one thing I'd say to any business owner is that you don't, to succeed in business, and as you quite rightly say, Aaron, most people start because they're good at what they do, their specialism, their niche. And suddenly being a business owner, as I know from my own experience, is a whole different skill set and other things that you have to learn about. But the good news is you don't have to do it on your own, and it's actually a strength to recognize that. So rather than having sleepless nights trying to be an expert in finance, HR, admin, marketing, and sales, you hire the experts to support you in those areas, and then you can focus on doing what you're good at, which is developing your product, service, and getting people to buy into the concept of investing in you as a business. So yeah, I think it is a strong thing to do, to recognize you need that help, rather than to sit there thinking as a business owner or a sole trader you have to figure it all out by yourself.
Yeah, and obviously you've got into business for yourself after working in HR and in I imagine for corporate companies, etc. How has that journey been for you? How has that worked out for you so far?
Very well. I got very, very lucky, I think, with a lot of things in the timing. So I started my business as a sole trader years ago, and it was just a little sideline that I did in addition to a corporate job. They knew I was doing it. I predominantly worked out of hours, and I just get a few queries once every few months. It was never anything huge. But then the pandemic came along and it changed my entire mindset about things. And I decided to choose that time to actually see, well, okay, let's take what I'm doing and let's see how I can grow it. Let's see how I can make it, my main source of income. And I think because, I've been with my last company for 10 years, I was fortunate enough to be able to suggest my role was redundant, receive redundancy, be taken on by them as a contractor, and I still work for them now, doing bits and pieces when I'm required to, and that arrangement works well. And I went part-time in my last year as well, so I was able to build up my business as well. So unlike a lot of business owners, I realised I was lucky because I didn't have that moment where I quit a job and was just sat around a kitchen table with no clients, no income, and wondering what to do next. I kind of phased myself into it, but it wasn't without its moments, particularly I think in the early parts of the pandemic when I was doing it and I was thinking, well, I think I'm marketing myself in the right way, but I'm not getting any customers, and beyond like the few that I had. But eventually, they started to come. Got through things through a lot of referrals, recommendations, and I think even now, a few years down the line, I still want to get bigger than I am, and I know I still need to up my game in terms of marketing and efforts and where I'm seen to be able to grow to the size that I want to grow to.
How are you finding the transition personally? Is it, are you a lot happier now that you're doing your own thing and kind of, managing your own work and time?
Absolutely. And I think for me, I know I've always been quite, I've been well organised. I'm always good at time management. So that's really helped me with this. And I am self-controlled enough to sit there and work throughout the day. But I think I am much happier as a person doing this transition. And I've enjoyed the work-life balance that it's brought, because yes, I still work hard on my business, but I sort of even sort of made a mental list in my head of all the things that I do that are sort of life admin as well, that I intersperse with running my business, and it means I do them alongside. So my day could consist of doing various things, walking the dog at different times of day, doing the domestic stuff, but also working on a business, which means that my entire life admin isn't just sandwiched into the weekend like it used to be. So for me, I like that. Obviously, I work at home predominantly, but I do travel around the country to see clients when I need to, and I don't mind doing that. So for me, yeah, it's brought a nice work-life balance, and I think now I'd struggle to give it up and go back the other way if I was asked to.
Yeah, I think a lot of remote workers or business owners who have that kind of flexibility, were not like on tools or like hands-on at job sites kind of thing, that they all seem to say that same thing, that it's just that balance, isn't it, where you can have the flexibility so you can kind of do bits and pieces. I mean, I'm sure you still work very, very hard, but just that flexibility of being able to kind of sort little things here and there just takes that pressure off your personal life as well.
Well, absolutely. And I think, I know, to be fair to my last manager, she was very flexible with me when I needed to be, but I feel like probably some of the things I've been flexible on in the last couple of years since I've been fully self-employed, I wouldn't have expected her to say yes to. So I do get it. And I think, we still have this ongoing debate in offices about whether people should be, hybrid, all in the office, all at home, or a mix of the two. And like you say, it very much depends on the type of work that somebody does as to whether that's possible. But for me, it's worked well. I found even when I was an employee and working at home, I was more efficient, more effective with my time, and you weren't spending time commuting and that. So yeah, for me, I've definitely seen the advantages, and it's just trying to get businesses to understand, actually, to trust employees, to do the right thing, be sensible. You deal with a small minority that don't, rather than being too prescriptive about what people do, because fundamentally you want to treat people like adults, and if you do as an employee, you're going to get far more out of them and far more trust and respect and loyalty back.
Yeah, and if people are happier in their own life, they'll be happier with work and they'll put more effort in anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've all worked in offices where, it doesn't matter if you're in the office or not. You're always going to get that minority that are not going to pull their weight and not going to do stuff. And, it's just the way humans are, I guess.
Well, it is. And I mean, yes, I've seen people who are in the office and they're sort of praised for presenteeism, which I don't like, because they might be there more hours than everybody else, but you also realise they spend more time being unproductive than a lot of other people as well. And for me, I always, I was flexible with the hours I used to work when I did work in a corporate role as the business required. But if I was just in the office and I didn't have anything else on, I would generally stick to my hours because I was efficient in them. I worked hard in them, and I wanted to go home and have a life in the evening and not be so shattered that I was fast asleep the whole time.
Yeah, that's no good. That's no life, is it? When you
No.
constantly, if ultimately it's about time management, isn't it? If you can't, get your stuff done in the time that you need to, and you're dragging it on, then you're just making it worse for yourself, and possibly showing people that actually you're not actually competent enough to get the job done.
Exactly, and I think it's an interesting one because I've argued this one from both sides of the table, because I think, yes, there's a lot to do with the individual and their time management, but I think there's also something to do with job design as well, because there's no such thing as a perfect job that gives you just the right level of work throughout the day constantly. Every job's going to have its peaks and troughs, and actually we need to flex our working hours around that. So you work harder during the peaks, you have a bit of time back during the troughs. And I've also seen some really bad job design where business owners have just lumped several things together, and the business has expanded and they're still expecting one person to do it, and then that person's going to burn out. So on the flip side, you've got that sort of consideration as well, to think about what would a reasonable person be expected to achieve successfully in the number of hours they're contracted to work per week, and then you try and design the job around those, as something realistic.
Yeah. From your experience, are employers kind of open to that discussion, or they just...
The good ones are, because they recognise they want to get their organisational design right, and actually that's some of the work I enjoy doing the most, is doing all design planning with people, where we look at structures and roles and trying to be as effective with money and resources as we can, and helping them to get the best out of their organisation. The other ones aren't, if they just think people are there to work and they'll pay them as little as they can get away with, and hope for the best. Because I think ultimately you've kind of got these two moving parts of the employer on one side and the employee on the other. And you've got the employees trying to think, okay, well, how much work is reasonable for me to do, and how much money is it reasonable for me to be paid to do it at the level I'm at? And then you've got the employer on the other side sometimes thinking, well, okay, how much can I push onto an individual, and how much can I afford to actually pay them? And that's when you get your clashes, is if those two sides don't marry up. So that's what I will try and help employers navigate, to make sure that they're paying fairly, but also their job designs aren't burning people out. Because if you push too much onto one person, you're then spending money on sick pay, and then you're pulling resources from other places in the business, and things are going to fall down. So I try and sell to business owners that it really is in their interests to try and get this stuff right.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you kind of sell that to them? How do you try and get them on board? Is it selling them that bigger picture, that end result?
It's the end result, and also talking them through the risks and the pain that they're going to experience if they carry on doing it their way. Because as I've found, people won't purchase something for pleasure usually. People always buy, whether it's a service or a product, because they want a solution to a problem. And it's when the pain becomes more prominent, then they're prepared to spend the money and make the investment in making that pain go away. So that's how I often have to hone my messages, to make people realise that. Unfortunately, some clients learn the hard way, and then they come back and have to admit I was right in the first place and they should have listened, because they've gone through the pain. But this is why I said I will work with people. I'm open to businesses to, they've got to tell me what they want as well, because it's ultimately their baby. I can only advise them. They've got to make the final calls. But I've got 20 plus years of experience, and I know what works and what doesn't. So that's what I can hopefully use, that expertise, to help other people avoid some of the pitfalls that it's all too easy to get into.
Yeah, so you help these businesses make these positive changes, and in your experience, what is that true leadership look like in the face of that change? How do you get them leaders to really implement them changes in a positive manner, really?
For me, it risk of saying the old words, but it always comes down to positive communication done in the right way at the right time. So a leader is not like a functional manager that's very operational. A leader has to be seen by their staff to be a visionary, somebody they'll want to follow, and somebody that they believe in and can get behind. So therefore, if that leader has built up trust and respect with the team, then what will happen is they will naturally want to follow the leader even through difficult times of change, particularly if the leader believes in it as well and can communicate it early enough in advance and sell the benefits of it to them, but also to make sure that the employees feel involved in the change, so they do have a bit of a say in what's going on as well, so they don't feel completely powerless. Because I think, to implement change in the worst possible way is when you just tell somebody something's going to happen, and maybe somebody might have some really good feedback and to help them do things differently or better, or to avoid some pitfalls themselves. So if you're seen to not be listening as a leader, that's when it's going to cause the problems. And also if you're not selling the advantages and people just don't understand it, and then that's when you get what I will call the huddles, where people will just whisper in the corner of the room. They'll draw their own conclusions, rightly or wrongly, and then what you can get is some people jumping ship because they're panicking, and then if one person does it, you'll find other people might follow. So yeah, business changes all the time. It has to. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter what type of work you do. If you just stand still and don't go forwards, you actually move backwards because all the competition overtake you. So change is inevitable. Things evolve as technology comes in, new working practices, and it's just really key that business leaders keep on top of this. And actually, if you're a leader in a business, and by this I'm sort of talking slightly lower level here, functional line managers, you've got to take your inspiration from the person at the top, so it comes back down to the CEO. They can't outsource that bit. They have to be the ultimate visionary that leadership team looks up to, and that's not something you can outsource to your HR function or any other function. You have to do it yourself, particularly if you're the face of that company and you're the brand that your clients have bought into.
Yeah, ultimately that sets the culture and the environment, doesn't it, for everybody else? Ultimately, I've worked in a lot of organizations and companies where that culture and environment isn't great. It's too focused on balance of profitability and the metrics rather than the people. And I think there's a balance to be found, where you obviously need to care about your people. People need to feel heard and like they're cared about and like they belong there, rather than that they're just a number that's expendable to the company.
Yeah.
How do you help companies kind of get to that point where you get that feeling for employees and that positive environment and culture?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's such a key point you've touched on there, that is what's needed. Because if you get that bit right, I will often start by saying the profitability will naturally follow. And I think so many businesses will invest a lot of time and money in trying to attract their clients, their customers, but they need to treat their employees in the same way. They need to treat them as potential customers, because there could be a crossover. You could get customers who come and work for a company with good knowledge. So quite often I will start with the culture, and then it's really looking at the values and the vision and the mission. It's those three things that it has to start with. And sometimes I will work with a CEO and help them to define what it is they're actually doing. They might know in their head, but they might not have clearly communicated it to the rest of their team. So really they start with their vision, as in, why does their company exist in the first place? What are they trying to do? And here's where I think you have to try and avoid some of the corporate speak that comes out. It's natural to start talking, we want to be the world leader in this, but is that actually realistic for what you are and what you're providing? And it's really, how can you make a difference to people's lives with your product or service, and how can you generate that enthusiasm into the rest of your team? Because I've seen companies that, they are just about the profit and the bottom line, but they're short-sighted because they take the shortcuts. They'll spend the least amount of money possible. But again, the employees don't feel good. They keep leaving. They're paying out in sick pay, in rehiring and retraining costs. And actually, you need to get your team infused and behind you. So that's where the vision comes in, and the mission, and then the values in terms of how you behave. And it's getting the employees to do it as well, because I really hate corporate values. I'm the first person to say it, because so many of them just think it's a box ticking exercise where you put some fancy words up on the toilet door or in your reception area. And it's always words like integrity and teamwork and stuff, which for me is kind of a given. You need to do that anyway, but it's really, what values make your business different? How do you communicate them to everybody else so they feel they can get behind them? And how do you embed them into everything you do, into all your people practices, to make sure that they are there and that people are following them and abiding by them? I mean, yeah, there's some things which I said should be a given. You turn up to work, you do your best work, you do the right thing by people. But it's kind of getting the employees involved in defining what those behaviours are as well, and saying this is how we operate. And then it's much easier then to spot the people who don't and be able to deal with them accordingly. So I think this is how I've kind of helped bring some of those behaviours. But I think the trickiest thing is sometimes getting the leadership team themselves to see their own flaws.
Yeah,
That's
that
where it's gone wrong.
yeah, and the fact that a lot of the time they're unwilling to show that vulnerability, really,
Yeah.
which it unfortunately then that makes other people, people talk about integrity, but if the leadership team are not being vulnerable and not owning their mistakes and putting their hand up and saying, oh look, this is who I am, this is what I've done, and you know this is what we're going to do going forward. If they're not living the values themselves, then you've got no chance of the employees following on.
Absolutely none whatsoever. You're right. And actually, something I learned from being a manager myself in the past is it's good to show your vulnerable side. It's good to show your human side. You don't want to turn up and behave like a robot because, yeah, what do people actually want out of their manager? And I can only answer it from what I've wanted when I've had one in the past. And it was really, don't interfere and micromanage me. I know what I'm doing. By all means, communicate with me regularly and tell me what's going on and tell me what I need to know. Back me up when I've done the right thing if somebody challenges me, and be there for me if I need to ask you for help and advice. And for me, those are the things that I need a manager to do for me personally. Other people might have something slightly different in there. But yeah, it's the last bit about professional advice. Yeah, you can have that in abundance, but there's no point having that if people can't approach you in the first place.
Yeah, and you see that a lot with managers where they're not approachable. And for me personally, I think as a manager, it's your job to make your employees' life easier, make it easier for them to do their job and be successful in what they do. If you're making it more difficult for that person to reach their potential and to get the output that they're capable of, then ultimately, from my perspective, you're doing a bad job. You're not, you're a hindrance rather than a support.
Exactly. And you also have the insecure manager who doesn't like somebody who's better than them reporting into them, and then it will feel that it will expose them. And actually, a good manager won't be afraid of that. They will hire people who are better than them. When I was head of HR, I hired a recruitment manager because they had more expertise in the area than I did, and that was fine. I wanted them to tell me what to do rather than the other way around in respect of that area of the business I was looking after. And I think that's a good thing. So I think it's also, yes, getting managers coached to face up and recognise what their own insecurities are and ask themselves where some of their biases and prejudices come from. And if any of that is getting in the way of them being able to serve their team in the best possible way.
Yeah, I've had that experience where, for me, the best leader is the one that creates more leaders. So generally, the best leaders I've worked with, a lot of the people that have ended up worked with them directly have then gone on to become leaders themselves because they've been lifted up, they've been encouraged, they've been pursued rather than kept down or seen as a threat. They've been supported through that journey, and they become leaders themselves.
And I like that. I've supported loads of my teams in the past, when they've got the potential, I've helped them get to that stage. And I think, it's a positive if you can almost make yourself redundant at the end of it because they don't need you anymore because you've got them to the right level, which is great. Because again, 20 plus years ago in a slightly different job, I remember I was kept down. I knew I had potential to develop. And I know the reason I was doing admin support back then, and I was the only person who could cope with working for 6 people, whereas nobody else could. So I think that was why they kept me there. I was almost become too valuable doing what I was doing rather than the bigger picture of where would I like to go next.
Yeah, that's frustrating when it's like that and people kind of keep you in that box. But ultimately, we need to let people develop, and people want to develop. And as a general rule, at least, people want to develop, people want to progress. And if people are doing well, we should be supporting that. We should be helping them through that journey.
Yeah, we do. We should. And this is something else I've helped companies do, is I've helped define career paths as well where they didn't previously exist, because people want to know, how do I get from A to B to C to D? And sometimes you have to manage employees' expectations and tell them they're not going to do it in the next 2 weeks. It's years of a journey of experience, but it's also about getting people to recognize that you can go sideways, you can go diagonally in a business. It's not always about going up all the time. And also, not everybody should be a people manager because it's not everybody's skill set. So it's about creating career paths for those who don't want to lead people, where they can still be like a subject matter expert or a project manager. They can still take on more responsibility, but they don't have to do the people bit if they're not naturally good at it or don't want to do it.
Yeah, because I mean, it can be difficult managing people, and it can be quite stressful. And a lot of people just don't want that. But that doesn't mean you can't be a leader within your role. Essentially, you could stay, at the level you're at, but you could still be a leader. I still see people as being leaders because if they are delivering in a way and they're buying into all the values and they're showing, what you want them to show, then they are that role model for everybody else, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a useful tip for business owners, because quite often, if I've needed to infiltrate change and I know there's not much respect amongst the management team in a business, I'll often think, okay, which peers do people look up to, and can I infiltrate them? Because then they can perhaps influence those around them if we can get them on board. So it's, like you say, there's leaders who might not have the title, they might not have that position, but they might have been there a while, they might be good at what they do, and they are naturally respected by other people. So it's sometimes useful in a business to be able to take ethical advantage of that where you need to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really good way to get buy-in, if you get the buy-in from the people that, socially that everybody else is looking up to or looking to for, for their cues and to lead them, essentially. Because you get that in every walk of life, don't you? You get, you'll always get people who stand out, who everybody's looking to for that kind of confirmation. Are we doing the right thing? Are we going the right way? Is this what we want, kind of thing?
That's right. And people are just sometimes looking for that reassurance that they are doing the right thing. Because I think deep down, nobody wants to be told they're bad at their job. I know people are, and we have to deal with that. But, people want to generally do the right thing. Or at least, if nothing else, have a quiet life and, do what they need to do to still get paid and hold a job down. So, it's in people's interests to get this kind of stuff right and to start to understand it and to know that it doesn't just happen by magic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good point, actually. One of the things we are, or I say we are, from my experience, that companies I've worked for and places I've worked are really quick to jump on people when they're not performing, but very, very slow, if they do it at all, to reward and give that positive reinforcement, which can negatively affect the culture as well.
Absolutely. And I think that leads into a whole key area about how do you actually reward people for a job well done, because it's very easy, I think, for people to feel unappreciated, or for them to think you'll only be appreciated if you stop doing what you're doing. So it's that ongoing recognition, and it's not always about more money. It's about what different groups of people are after. Sometimes it's as simple as a thank you, so long as it's sincere and done in the right way at the right time, or perhaps ongoing small rewards and recognition rather than the traditional old-fashioned bonus that comes once a year for some jobs. Because I've yet to see a bonus calculated the same way depending on in a company. It's very, very random. And yes, some people are motivated by money. Obviously, people need money. People don't work for the fun of it or for free. But it is so much more to reward than that, and getting it right and understanding your people and what actually matters to them. And again, it's areas of work where I've worked with businesses and helping them understand that and put things in place for them.
Yeah, I think it is a difficult one with reward, and like I say, it's not all about financial, and I'd argue financial is actually down the list to to the personal touch of people actually feeling valued and like the contribution matters to the company and to the people within the company. I think that's more important. And I've seen and worked in companies that have just paid it lip service, really, where they they'll send out a mass email, or thank you, it's been really busy, you've done really well this week, and that might happen once every 6 months or something. And it's just kind of paying lip service to that. There's no personal touch to it. There's no reaching out to that person and having an understanding of who they are, what they're doing, and how they've actually contributed. And I think it just, when people get them kind of emails and they know everybody's got the same email and it's it just loses its weight, and people just don't
really
get the same
does.
feeling.
And particularly if you know you've sat next to somebody who's done very little to support or help during that busy week, and they're getting the same email, because then it will make people think, well, why should I bother to work so hard if I'm treated the same as somebody who hasn't?
Yeah, and I think it is a big thing that we identify people as individuals and what they bring, and I think that personal touch makes a massive difference. And I've yet to work at a company that's quite got that right yet.
Yeah, and I know one size doesn't fit all, but and I've seen some very well-intentioned ideas with one size fitting all go very badly wrong, token gestures that haven't gone down too well. But I think it's recognizing your employees, and I think an exercise I've talked about many times before is that you need to sort of look at it with a marketing hat on rather than a finance hat. You need to look at your different employee personas and look at the different groups of people you've got working for you. You could sort of give one of them a name and sort of try and draw an identity for them. And you can do it based on your own research, but it's like thinking, well, what does this group of people actually want? And it could be age, it could be their health, it could be all sorts of different things that are really what benefits work best for them and what they're actually looking for. So for some people, they might just want a shopping voucher every month or a little reward like that if they do a good job, something to help them out with bills that you can do without having tax implications. Other people, it might be they more want the traditional healthcare package as well because they've got caring responsibilities and they want to know that their family's covered for things like that. So there's so many different things you need to think about, but it comes down to the personas rather than one size fitting all and just giving everybody the same thing, because again, you're wasting your money. Say if you've got struck a deal with a gym down the road from you as a corporate that will offer everyone a discount, but you've only got 3 people actually take it up, it tells you haven't done your research and you don't understand your employees and what they're actually wanting. And the other thing I think you have to get really right with benefits is not to firstly use them as a substitute for poor culture the rest of the week, like treat people like dirt Monday through to Thursday, but give them free pizza on a Friday. And secondly, that the rewards don't come across as being like a parental approach, as in, we know what's best for you, so we've arranged for a healthcare professional to come in and give you a talk about quitting smoking, and there's going to be a free fruit bowl on the way in. Again, they're well-intentioned exercises, but you have to think about how an employee on the receiving end actually feels about that. Because chances are they might feel a tad patronised, or that they're being told what to do. Ultimately, you have to try and sell to people subtly so that they can come to their own conclusions, and then they're more likely to do what it is that you need them to do as an employee. So, those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, definitely, and like I say, it's crucial that you have that personal touch in it. So creating them like almost avatars, like you would with marketing, is a good way. I've never thought of it that way, to be honest, but that's a really good way of doing it, because then you can have a better understanding of what makes that person tick, and you have you'll know what kind of positivity and rewards that they're looking for to help them get to where they want to be and to feel appreciated within the company.
Exactly. And again, I know of a company that during the pandemic, and this included me, they sent everybody a box of biscuits. It was an expensive box of biscuits. Again, very well-intentioned gesture. And this is when I say one size didn't fit all. It was sent out without my knowledge by somebody in my team at the time who'd been told by somebody else just to get on with it and do it. And again, I know I probably did overreact a tad at the time when I reflect on it, but I don't eat biscuits. So it got to me that why is my team sending me a box of biscuits when they know I've never eaten one in the whole time that they've known me? I then had the stress of donating them to somebody else. Thankfully, I think we were going to a dinner party, so I gave them as the token thank you present then. But I thought, well, actually, I wouldn't have been offended if they'd recognised that and just saved the money and not bothered to send it to me. And I appreciate they couldn't do it for everybody like that. But from other people across that business, there was somebody who thought it was a suspicious package in the post and threw it back at the postman because they weren't expecting anything. And there was somebody else who had a difficult conversation with their wife because they thought they were having an affair with somebody when a present turned up for them. So again, I use it as a slight extreme example of when a very well-intentioned thing didn't go completely to plan. And again, to be balanced, there were other people who were just very grateful and said thank you very much. So but it proves the point that one size doesn't fit all, and that money could have perhaps been better spent.
Yeah, it comes down to understanding your people again, doesn't it? It's ultimately taking that time and just if you feel understood and you feel like
Mm.
they're, even though we're all part of a team, we're all trying to come together and do one thing, and we all want to be a team. We also want that individuality, and we want to be recognized for that. And I think
Yeah.
that's true of just normal human life as well, not
Mm.
just in work and business. I think we all want to be a part of something. We also want to be recognized for individuality, and I think it's important that as leaders, we do our best to do that.
Exactly. And a good leader will surround themselves with people with different personalities as well, and ones who will actually challenge them. Because I think the worst leaders I see are the ones who are so insecure they surround themselves with the nodding dogs who will agree with everything they say and do, because it doesn't challenge them and it doesn't push them to grow. And I think there's been times in my career where my team have challenged me, but I've welcomed it. I listen to feedback, I take it on board. I may or may not agree with it, but I listen to it. And I think it helped me grow. What I didn't do, is like some leaders will do, is once somebody does that, is you think, well, that's it. How can I get them out of the business at the next possible restructure? And I don't work like that, and it's incredibly toxic to think in that way. So, yeah, I really do try and focus on taking feedback on board and growing, because I think all feedback is a gift, as somebody said to me recently, and it's how you get better.
Yeah, definitely. And I've worked in leadership teams where well, I've witnessed it myself, where there's two leaders at the same level who are almost identical in the way that they handle things. So
Mm,
then they just kind of reinforce each other rather
mm,
than taking on any other opinion, and then they become almost more defensive, and they push people away, and get into this mode where they are right, they stay away because they've
mm.
reinforced each other.
Yeah.
And from my experience, that the best is usually the opposite. So
Mm,
you get two polar opposites. One who's maybe really people focused and orientated, and one maybe that's about the numbers and
mm.
driven that way. And then together you make one really good leader, because you balance each other out, you challenge each other to meet in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I know the way my head works, I can do both, but not usually at the same time. I like a bit of data, but I also like a conversation with somebody. But my brain has to go into a slightly different mode to deal with the data side than it does the conversational mode. And I kind of recognize those two bits. And yeah, I did actually work with an HR manager years ago. We were at the same level, but we did complement each other quite well, because we did both have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. And actually, for a period of many years, that was a successful relationship. It had its ups and downs, definitely, but it was generally successful, because we could do that.
Yeah, me myself, I'm much better with the people side of it than I am with
Mm,
the figures and stuff like that. But that's something I have to work on, and something that I try and get the balance right on. But
mm,
it's not always easy for me, and then having somebody alongside me who's the opposite actually really helps me, and
mm.
kind of keeps me balanced.
Yeah, and I think you need that in any kind of team, people with different skills rather than a set of clones who all think the same way. And I think, going back to another one of my early bad experiences, I remember there were people, it was quite a command and control culture, which doesn't go down well in this day and age, and it certainly didn't with me. But I know that there were managers in there behaving because they copied the behavior of other managers in the same organization. But I also knew it wasn't really them when they were behaving in that way. And I thought that was such a shame, because any kind of creativity was getting stifled.
Yeah, that must be frustrating as well. I've kind of seen that kind of behavior as well, where people just mirror and mimic, and a lot of the time, especially if it's a new manager, it's because they're not sure of themselves. They're not
Yeah,
they're not comfortable enough to be themselves, and they just mirroring and copying other stuff
yeah,
they've seen, and often because they're doing it and it's not authentic, they'll go over the top with it a little bit.
yeah.
I've
Um,
seen that.
yeah. So have I, sadly. And I think it's something that is so common. New managers get promoted, no one ever teaches them how to manage properly. Yes, there's lots of theories you can learn. You can write essays on it, but it doesn't teach you how to manage. You can sit in a classroom for a day and do a generic course. It doesn't teach you how to manage. And this is why I put together a 10-week course of my own that's an hour a week, covers the entire employee life cycle, isn't about essays, but covers the practical tips that you need to learn, and also does the one-to-one coaching so that people can get on board with it and give the opportunity to sort of think, reflect on what's their style, where did it come from, how can it be better, and it will give people that confidence. Because I think deep down, all new managers on some level will will suffer from some form of imposter syndrome, and like you say, it will come out in different ways. And particularly if you mimic what you've experienced in the past, and if what you've experienced in the past isn't good, then that behavior is going to carry on, and people don't always know how to do things differently or better. So it's sort of giving people that opportunity to think, and be able to bring their own personality into what they do, because that's what the team will latch on to and respect more.
Yeah, I think that one-to-one coaching element is really, really important, and I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong, and a lot of businesses, you don't have that opportunity to reflect with somebody and have that two-way conversation, have somebody almost play devil's advocate and challenge you a little bit as well
Mm.
on on why you're doing stuff or where it's come from, or the
Yeah.
impact it's having on your team, rather than just kind of just doing stuff and left to it and kind of think, well, this is working, it's fine, but
Mm.
realistically, it's not working. Yeah, and maybe the staff are just too afraid to say anything and just
Mm.
going and
Exactly.
whinging by the water cooler.
Yeah, and it's absolutely worth getting that sort of knowledge and confidence behind you, so you can do those things, and to be able to reflect, because as you say, that otherwise exactly the situation you've described will happen. You will become isolated from your team, and they will just moan about you behind your back. And if somebody's got a problem with me, I'd much rather they said it to my face. I'd respect them more, and it also means I can listen to it, because I'm not beyond taking on feedback and trying to learn from it. And I think, yeah, this is why I want to work with people, because I think for me, I get the aha moments and I get the job satisfaction if I can see people having the light bulb moments in their heads when they realise that they could do things differently or better, and they get the results they need. And I think actually it does work the other way as well. I've done some leadership training earlier this year, and one person at the end of it, when I was saying about all the things a manager shouldn't do, they had to admit they did all of them. And actually they realised at the end of the course that perhaps being a people leader wasn't the right job for them. And actually I saw that as a result as well, because at least it saved them and their team years of pain to come, if they actually realise they're better at doing something different.
Yeah. Do you ever work with people about managing upward? So as
Yes,
in,
that is,
yeah.
yeah. I cover that on my course as well, because again, it's something I had to learn to do over the years as well. Managing your manager is another challenge in itself, because you have to again gauge what they're like as a person, what they respond well to and what they don't, and working out how to get the best out of them. I mean, earlier in this chat, I said this is what I want out of a manager, and I've had good managers in the past come up and say to me, "How do you like to be managed?" And I've told them pretty much that word for word, and it sets expectations. But I think for people in the middle of it who have to manage upwards as well as downwards, yeah, they need to say, what do you need from me, and be able to have those open and honest conversations and build that relationship with their manager as well. So, and also know that their managers are human too. They will have flaws, they will have weaknesses, they won't be perfect, but they need to know what those are so they can work around them.
Yeah, and it's about knowing how and when to approach stuff as well, isn't it?
Mm.
With that person, so that you can get a positive outcome from
Mm.
it, really, so you can both move forward in the relationship rather than just whinging and causing problems or making things worse, essentially.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it's knowing how to emotionally and in the right way play somebody, as it were, to know how to navigate that, because it is tricky, because you could say the same thing to two different managers. One would respond really well, one wouldn't. You just have to be intelligent enough to realize which one's which.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the difficulty for a lot of employees, especially that that if you've got a young workforce and people who are
Mm.
new to work, they're still trying to figure out the work environment, really, trying to figure
Mm.
out how to interact in that environment, and it can be really difficult for them to learn and figure out how to approach a manager, really, or how to
Mm.
get the confidence to have them conversations, because they can be difficult conversations at times.
They can, and again, for a manager who takes on somebody who's a school or college leaver, they also have to realise they don't come with experience, and there's certain things that you might take for granted if you've been at work for a while that they won't know, that you have to actually take the time to tell them. And then I think it's down to that manager to have absolutely the right people skills. I don't like soft skills as a term. I think it's people skills is a better alternative, to be able to recognize that and help them and coach them, and then they'll realize if they do want to ask a question, they can approach their manager with it and they'll get a good answer. And again, give an example of another manager who shouldn't have done something, and this was a manager who inducted a trainee, and they never told them that they're where the fridge was in the office to put their lunch in it. And it sounds like a basic thing that most people would say, where's the fridge, or is there one, or you clock where it was, but they didn't. And they ate their lunch out of their bag, and they gave themselves food poisoning because it was a bit of meat that got a bit warm in the heat. And again, it's a manager just not recognizing that there are some naive people. If you take on a younger person at work, it's great. They come full of ideas. They come full of all sorts of positives they can bring, but you also need to know they don't always have the life experience straight away, and you need to make some form of allowance for that and sort of give them a different nurturing side that you wouldn't give somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point as well. That that I've been guilty of it myself. When you get, especially we get teams that generally have a high turnover. If you know you're an entry level and people are continually moving on or moving up or whatever to better places, we can be really guilty of just assuming that knowledge because we know it and because some of the team that are already there have this knowledge. We just assume that the new people coming in will just know it and just continue, and we're not really sensitive to the fact that actually we need to recycle the information. We need to go back to the start because these people are brand new in. They don't have all the information that we assume they have, and we're almost tying their hands behind their back when they're trying to come in and hit the ground running.
Exactly. And again, something I've done is I've helped organisations design their onboarding and inductions, because for me, this should not just be a paper tick box checklist that sits on their file to prove that they've read in inverted commas every policy. That's not how to induct somebody. No one's going to remember what's in the handbook. You just need to tell them where it is so they know where it is if they need to see it. But it's more about some of the useful stuff that's practical. And what I've designed in the past for businesses is like little fact sheets that you leave on somebody's desk on day one that says welcome. Here's what to do if you smoke, here's what to do, here's where the kitchen is, here's where the toilets are, here's who your first aiders are, mental health and medical. Here's how the next few weeks or months will work for you. And that goes such a long way to the contrast, which is somebody just being shown a desk on day one and told to get on with it.
Yeah, definitely. From my experience, that a lot of the best places will have somebody sort of almost assigned to you to kind of mentor and help you to just settle in really at the start and find your feet.
It's a good system when it works. And again, it very much depends on having the right people assigned to that job and them also being told how they should conduct themselves in that time. Because again, I seem to have had so many experiences in my early career that have set me up for what I do now, but I didn't have a great mentor in one of my early jobs. They just pretty much told me off every time I made a slight mistake, which didn't exactly help me. So it didn't support in the way that it was intended to. But yeah, if you have the right person who will show you around and they don't begrudge doing it either, because I think that's a big thing, they've got to be able to be approached, then that works. And it can also help a manager, because I know when I've had new people in my team in the past, obviously I've got different members of the team to show them how to do different things. I didn't have to do 100% of it myself. And that's as it should be, but it's just giving some thought to what a person might need and making sure they don't get overwhelmed, but they have the right amount of information in easy to find bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, I suppose that's the other side of it, and then the flip side is overwhelming them with information and just giving them too much at the start and not allowing it time really to settle in and to drip feed that information almost.
And also not to crucify them for small mistakes. People learn from them. I think as long as you learn from them, you take it on board and you don't make the same mistake again, it's fine. So again, people are not perfect, including business owners, including senior managers. So it's again giving people the space to make some mistakes that aren't obviously not critical ones that could close a business down. It's not sort of have a free fall and do what you like, but it's sort of know that it's a learning environment and people aren't going to be chastised, because otherwise if people know they get penalised for mistakes, what will happen is they'll hide them and then they'll get found later on when they've become much bigger issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about creating that psychological safety, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of companies, and again, we're just saying bad experiences here, aren't we? But
Yeah.
I've had some awful experiences where, psychologically you don't feel safe, and that just breeds anxiety and stuff, even if you are then owning your mistakes, but then you're getting constantly punished for it or, getting it in the neck. Then really, your anxiety's peak. It affects your home life because you're dreading work and you're worrying about things, and it can become a really negative cycle, really.
Oh, it really can. And I think I heard a really interesting thing because I was at an event on Monday. It was aimed at entrepreneurs and business owners, but I think they sort of said, what is it about people that they will give 100% of themselves at work normally, but it means that they are drained in the rest of their lives. So they're not giving their best selves to their partners, their children, their pets, their families, their friends, because everything is work focused. And I think actually, more philosophically, there is a society design that needs to be rethought, because as humans, we weren't designed to look at a screen for so many hours a week, if that's what we do, and then only go off and explore the world for a few weeks a year. We've sort of fallen into a pattern that's still based on the 19th century industrial revolution, and it's starting to change with things like hybrid working, but I think it needs to go a lot further. And yes, people will always want a purpose, they'll need to earn money, they'll need to work, but actually there's so much better about getting a good life design in there as well, so that people's work doesn't become so fundamentally overwhelming that they can't be the best version of themselves in other areas of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the focus needs a shift from time, which seems to be a massive focus on how many hours you're working, how many hours you're doing this, and focus shift to the work, the output that you want.
Yeah.
This is the output that we want. If they do it in 3 days, brilliant. If they, why does it have to be a 5-day thing? I don't understand the concept.
I agree. Yeah, and if you work efficiently like I did, you'd often find yourself twiddling your thumbs and pretending to look busy, which was also quite stressful, particularly somebody who likes to be busy. And again, it comes to this sort of give and take, go with the ebbs and the tides and the flows as work comes in. Yes, you work harder when you need to and not when you don't. And that's much better than this sort of expectation that there'll be a steady flow between 9 and 5, Monday and Friday. And then you have to throw into the mix that not everybody does their best work in those hours. Some people are night owls, some people are early birds. So if you can, they should be able to work those hours when they are at their best. And yeah, it's just a better overall creation of an existence, really, of any existence. And I'm being very philosophical on it, but I think, again, it comes back to, I can help businesses with these insights, and I can help them plan and think in a different way. And if they're radical and they do some of these things, it gets them ahead of their competition, and it will make people naturally who feel like that to be drawn towards them, rather than these traditional 9 to 5 presenteeism cultures where it's very much command and control. Because again, we have evolved in recent years as humans. We are thinking in a different way now. Technology is enabling us to do different things that we couldn't previously do. And I think our working practices need to adapt to that, and we need to be open-minded enough to try new things.
Yeah, and if you do that and you are open minded and you bring in this this better work culture, I think you will actually start to draw in the better employees anyway, the people who who are keen to get things done and get things sorted.
Exactly. And you don't want to put off the good ones if they've got childcare or elder care to work towards. And I think, the inflexible businesses do that. They lose the good people because they won't agree to what's quite a reasonable demand, to perhaps come in half an hour earlier and go home half an hour earlier because they've got an elderly parent that needs to be looked after, and you lose that talent. So I think, yes, if you're a right business and you set yourself up to do the right thing, then you will naturally attract the good people. And sort of coming back to the point about flexibility, again, it's another fundamental flaw we've got in the fact that the office hours in this country do not time with the school hours. There's always going to be that disconnecting period. And again, when I was a child, it was of the generation where mum stayed at home and they had to resign. There was no maternity leave. So I was lucky to have a parent at home the whole time. Whereas now, obviously, there's more of a focus on after school clubs and childcare, daycare, so that people can sort of bridge that gap between school ending and work ending. But again, if we are more flexible and we think about how we do things, I would hope as a country we would come together and reform some of those, so there is a more of a natural time and people don't have those kind of headaches which they have to then cover for that period of time when people are at school.
Yeah, I mean, that just makes sense, doesn't it? Ultimately, we've got the school system, which is set in this country anyway, and then we're not working around it with our business yet. We're saying we want more people to be in work, etc. But then we tie their hands behind their back and make it more difficult for them.
Yeah, we do. And don't even start me on the subject of what people learn at school and how useful that is in real life, because that could be a whole different path I could go down for some hours. But let's just say I've had some very impassioned conversations with teachers about it who agree with me about, we're not always teaching people the skills that we should be teaching them to equip them for modern life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. There's no life skills at all taught,
Mm,
um, in the majority of schools, at least.
mm,
I had a friend who went to Japan recently, and in Japan, they teach life skills in school
mm,
as a big part of what they do. They teach them to and they get them to go and do it. So they get them to go to the shop to buy something, and bring the change, and to go on the train, and they teaching them how to live.
mm.
And they do that from a young age.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, and we're terrible. We don't do any of that. We don't teach people how to manage their finances.
Mm.
How to get about living life, just
No.
generally.
Or how to run a business and think differently. I think people are still taught that you go through an education system, then you work generally full time for your entire career, and then at the end of it, if you've got any health left, you get to retire on a pension. And again, it's no way to live life. The other reason I did what I did now is I'd like to do my exploration and my travelling now while I've got my health. I don't want to wait till I'm in my 60s. I want to do it now. And yeah, I'm thinking, well, nobody taught me how to run a business. I did business studies at school. I remember doing the break-even charts as part of that. But it was very, very figurative. And what I never really got, which I'm understanding now as an adult, as I'm going to webinars and educating myself, is it's where you start with a passion for something and a vision of your own, and you work out how can you monetize it, how can you help people. And I don't think there's enough of that innovation allowed. People are still taught a lot of conformity. And as somebody who likes to naturally rebel against things sometimes and do my own thing, I don't fit into that mold. But actually, we do have a use if we think differently, because we're not just a clone of everybody else. And yeah, for some people, don't get me wrong, there's lots of people who don't want to do what I do. They do want to go to work and do all those things. And if they do, that's fair play to them. But I think, again, it's a fundamental change needed in society in general about how we view things and how we view life.
Yeah, definitely. The schooling system is very much teaching you how to be an employee, teaching
It
you
is.
how to conform, how to just you're not really, aside from, I don't know, maybe drama or something, you're not really encouraged to have that you know that creativity to be yourself, or to explore things and find yourself. And as a kid, that's the perfect time to be doing it, surely, to be exploring like different feelings, thoughts, ideas.
Exactly. And I know that speaking to people, there are some things in schools that have definitely progressed since I left, in terms of some of the subjects covered, and opening sort of people's eyes to different things. But I think, it's like, yes, there'll be a need for maths for some people. If you're going to be an architect or an accountant, you might need to learn a bit more advanced stuff. So fair enough, you don't want to lose it. But for the majority of people, it should be more practical life skills, like how to budget and how to manage money. And I was never taught that. Thankfully, I had two very good parents who sort of inadvertently taught me. So I've learned how to budget for myself and manage money. And actually, a few years of running a payroll really helped me do calculations and understand it and understand how tax works. So again, it was useful for a job, but it taught me a lot. But yeah, it's how to budget, how to run a house, how to look after a child, how to look after a pet, how to have a responsible attitude towards relationships. All of those kind of things, I think, far more valuable than perhaps somebody learning about some far off mountains somewhere in another part of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And they're more difficult to master as well, I'd say, because of the emotional connection to them things as well, because
Mm,
we inevitably get emotionally connected, to people, to money, because it can affect our safety and how we feel about our lives.
mm.
So them areas are much more difficult for us to master, and with getting no training at all, or learning, and just thrown to the wolves once you leave school, essentially.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's just so important that that changes, and we have governments that allow schools to teach certain things, or that they are part of the curriculum. And so it does allow for a change in terms of how we all function, because we can all see the issues in society. And I'm obviously not that kind of podcast for me to go into them all, and we all know what they are. We see them on the news, we read about them. And again, the one, again, I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but it's relevant to HR, is I'd love to reform recruitment. And I would love to, in terms of how it's done, the experience people have, because it's, again, a system which I think is fundamentally broken. And there's so much more that I think could be done But for me, I can't do that as a solopreneur running a business that wants to expand. I actually need to get in and influence the government to do the things I want to do around recruitment to make it a fairer process for people, but also a more effective one. Because I think there's so many people who miss out on jobs, again, due to bad managers, due to bad systems, and due to bad training. And again, it's sort of relevant to what we've been talking about an overall experience, which is why I mention it. But yeah, it's something that's sort of been on my mind for a while now.
Yeah, and everyone seems to do it differently from what I've seen. Then there's there's very often just a personality thing. Does that one person like you? Are you going to get hired based on that one interview, essentially?
Yeah, and yes, you've got to be able to work with them as well as they've got to be able to do the job. But I think, so many references now are factual. But I've seen a problem where I do support my clients where you've got people who actually ghost you as candidates. You hear lots of candidates moaning about people never getting back to them with feedback, which is something I always try and do, which I understand. I think people should have feedback, because how else would they get better? But I've seen the flip side of it in an organisation where you offer people a job and you never hear from them again. And I thought, at least have the balls to be honest and say, no, it's not for me, and here's the reasons why. Because again, it helps the employer learn about what the market is actually asking for. And it's just so frustrating that people don't do that. So, I would like to be able to do something like that. And I think if I look at technology, and there's a lot of people out there who might disagree with me on this point, I'd like some more transparency. So I think rather than people having to put a CV forward, actually your career history is as documented by HMRC for who you've been working with. And actually, if you apply for a job, you give employers permission to access that, and it's just there, it's factual. You don't have to reproduce it, so people can see where you've worked, how long you've worked for. But then obviously you've still got the opportunity to be able to bring it alive and talk about how your skills are relevant to the role and what you can bring to a company. But flip side, again, employers need to get much better at being clear about what they want from a candidate, what a good fit is, so that they know whether it's the right thing. Because if you get it right, some of the wrong candidates will deselect themselves. You don't have to then do it for them. And then you can get a process that's a sensible conversation rather than a rigid series of questions. People will feel good about that experience, and then the experience they get on the first day will match the interview and the effort that's gone into it. And that it should be compulsory for there to be honest feedback without any recriminations, so that it gets rid of prejudice, it gets rid of discrimination, and it allows people to sort of improve and go for the jobs they want and have the right skills. And again, the other thing I say to managers is try not to have the golden unicorn, or think that that's it. So in other words, where you're trying to recruit for a job, but it just doesn't exist on the marketplace. There isn't anybody with that skill set, but you're still hell-bent on it. Or you won't employ somebody who's got 90% of the skills because you want 100%. And again, it's about being realistic, taking somebody on and allowing them to train and develop to get the remaining bit where they're falling short. And again, it's so flawed. And I think the other final thing that I would love to regulate, and I think this is the bottom line, I'd like to regulate recruitment if I was in government. And this is not a pledge for power from me. I've got no interest in getting into politics at all. But I think it's about also making sure managers don't sit on CVs and then wonder where all the candidates have gone. It's getting them to move quickly and give the candidate as good an experience as possible, because ultimately it's less painful for them.
Yeah, definitely. I'm quite surprised actually that a lot of people get offered jobs and just don't get back to people. That's shocking to me actually, because I've never known that to be a thing. But and it's bizarre, because if somebody offered me a job, even if I wasn't going to take it, I would definitely respond, because what if I want to come back here in the future? What if something changes in my life, and or if that person moves on to a different company and I want to work for that company? Like why wouldn't you just have the courtesy to say, I'm sorry, I've been offered something else elsewhere, I'm going to take this, but I really appreciate your time and your effort.
I think it's 5 seconds out of your day, doesn't cost anything, and it goes a long way. And I think for me, morally, it's the right thing to do as well. And I've turned down jobs I've been offered in the past as well, and I've always done that. Same, I've declined interviews if I've not wanted them and because circumstances have changed. And again, I would feel bad if there was somebody sat around waiting for me and I didn't turn up.
Yeah.
So I think
it's a strange one for me.
Yeah.
Is that a new thing that you've kind of seen? Is that like a new culturally changed? How the culture's changed?
It's got more and more common, I think. I did used to see it years ago when I was dealing with lower paid jobs, not everybody would turn up to interviews. But I think now it has become more and more common, and I think it's just wrong, and there should be that gap. And again, this is probably somebody's going to accuse me of being big brotherish on this, but I would like to regulate that as well. So to the point actually that if you release your details to somebody applying for a job, if you have not turned up to an interview, you've been a no-show, or you've declined a job but you haven't told anybody, that shows up on the record as well, because I think it would encourage a change of behaviour. And I know people won't like that big brotherish, but that would be for me what would fix a broken system at the moment, because we generally do recruitment in this country in the same way, and I don't think it's fit for purpose anymore. And the reason I've kind of gone down this rabbit warren at the moment is because if you get your recruitment right, a lot of the other good stuff we've been talking about so far will follow.
Yeah, ultimately, if you know what your vision and your mission is, and you know the values of your company, and you've got them down, then essentially you can get the right people on board, can't you? It's about getting the right people on the bus, isn't it? And then you'll be a good fit, and you all go in the direction that you want to go. And
and then you're nurturing those people to grow with you and help you expand as you've got your dreams for your business and where you want to take it. And that's good. And yeah, every business will need a mix of the people who are ambitious and want to develop, as well as those who just want to come in, do what they do and go home again. That's fine as well, so long as you know, and so long as they continue to update their knowledge and they don't just do what they've been doing for the last 30 years without question, then you're fine. But yeah, get your recruitment right. All the other good stuff will then usually follow.
What do you think about the interview process then, Doug? Because ultimately, because I've done interviews and stuff, and you never really yourself in an interview. You're a bit anxious, you're a bit nervous. You've maybe done all this prep stuff, and it's even with the best intentions in the world, sometimes it can be a little bit false. So is there a way around that, do you think? Is there a better solution?
I think there is. Obviously, fundamentally, it comes down to those who are interviewing, creating a good experience again and trying to put the candidates at ease. So for me, it's about think where you're doing. I mean, I know there's interviews that take place in coffee shops these days rather than boardrooms, because there's a little bit less formality in it and people are more natural and likely to open up. You've also got people who are great at competency-based interviews because they've done so many of them and they've practiced it, but they're rubbish when you actually employ them. So I think, yeah, fundamentally, the old interview where everyone was suited and booted should be out the window, because most workplaces now have a more casual dress code since the pandemic. And I think people should be able to be themselves. We've had debates in the past about whether tattoos are acceptable to show at work, but yes, of course they should be, so long as there's nothing offensive in a really predominant position, then yes, that they should be. And I think, yeah, there's more than one way to get the best out of a candidate. And you want to know who that person really is. So I think if you, as the person who has a discussion with them, terms it as a discussion, behaves in a natural way and not like a scientific robot who reads out questions off a script, and does it in an environment that's more relaxed than a boardroom, then I think that candidate is going to relax. And yes, you can build in other methods as well, but you also don't want to build in 9 stages of interview. You should be able to make a decision in 1 or 2, I would think. And also not just get some free advice. So if you're recruiting for an HR director, where you're asked lots of employment law questions during your interview, which seems suspiciously like they're trying to get free advice out of you while you're at it. I think, it's got to be a 2-way experience. And I think the candidate has to know what their power is in that process as well, and what rights they have to be able to, ask questions of them, not just something fundamental at the end of it that they feel they should ask, but that it's a natural conversation. And again, I hired a great head of recruitment who was, very good at putting people at ease and having a natural conversation with them. And I know we both interviewed somebody once, and they obviously pulled some questions off the internet and they proceeded to try and ask everyone. And in the end, I had to stop them and say, firstly, we've got a plane to catch. We can't, we do have to actually cut this off at some point. But secondly, that's not a good impression in terms of just reading things up, because, as a recruiter, you want to know that a candidate is genuinely interested, has done their homework, and what they ask and how they behave is a fit and natural to that organisation, rather than they're going through another generic process. So, yeah, I think it's tough. And I think the toughest thing is where you apply for jobs where you could do it and you don't get a shortlist and you don't get any feedback. And it might be because there's been 300 applicants there, and you've got to draw the line somewhere. So I do sympathise. But I think, yeah, interviewing needs to be more natural, less formal, and what's the word? Not regulated for this one, because I want it to allow for some creativity in it. But I think, yeah, that's it. More natural and more formal.
Yeah, I think the putting it in a social environment like a coffee shop or something like that is a better approach personally. I
Mm,
think it'll be a neutral area, so you're less intimidated going there for a start,
yeah,
and then you may be able to have that more conversational discussion about about the job and what you can bring, rather than, like you say, getting that almost scripted going in. You're really nervous. You're already, the interviewer is comfortable because they're in their environment. You going
yeah.
into a strange environment already, maybe a bit nervous and anxious, and it can just be really difficult, I think, sometimes in that scenario to be authentic at least, and give them,
Mm.
this is who I am.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so much there that needs to be done. And again, you don't have to wait for law changes. Companies can do this now, and this is something again I can help them with if they're finding that their current process isn't working in the way that they want it to. And I think, even the dress code. So rather than say you don't want to turn up to an interview in a suit if your interviewer's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and it'd just be nice to say, we have an informal dress code here. I will be wearing this for our interview. So when you do come in, feel free to wear this so people don't feel out of place. Just little things like that.
Yeah, again, I think that's important. I think, if the dress code for the job is the dress code you should have the interview in,
Mm,
if you ask me, because you turn up suited and booted and stand out, you may be waiting in the foyer of the company or whatever, and
mm,
everybody else is just walking about in jeans and looking at you because they know, oh, you're there for an interview now, and you're already then anxious, and people
mm.
looking at you all the time. And
Yeah,
it's just these
absolutely.
little details that can make a big difference to people, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for while we're on this related subject is getting to managers who don't feel put out if somebody goes for an interview. People should be able to be open and honest about it, because when you go for an interview now with a company, it's almost like cheating on your partner. You do it behind their back. You have a fake dentist appointment, doctor's appointment. You leave early one day, or you do it on Zoom when you're working from home. There's no transparency because people don't feel they can be honest about it. And I know that very much depends on the manager, but people should be, because I think for me, some turnover in a business is a good thing. You don't want people stuck around for years with the same ideas. You do want a bit of natural progression and turnover. And if you can't give somebody what they want where you are, which isn't always possible, then yeah, you want to support and encourage them to move on if they feel it's the right thing to do for them. And again, you should be able to be open about that rather than sneaking around behind somebody's back to do it.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things there as well, isn't it? So, like, they could be progressing their career. There might not be any opportunities in the company that they're at. They may be progressing their career, and we don't want to
Mm,
be holding them back. So, we can
exactly.
potentially support them in making that progress. But on the flip side, it could be that they're not happy at the company, and it could identify something sooner that may be able to be fixed, and you may be able to
Yeah,
build that relationship and mend it, and go in
yeah.
the right direction.
Exactly. And, you know, I'm a big believer in the stay interview rather than the exit interview. So find out how your employees are feeling before they quit and it's too late. Um, if you can fix problems sooner rather than later, it's great, because you might think your team are happy if they don't talk to you, but actually, silence doesn't always mean it's a good thing. You've got to be receptive enough to recognise that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, how do people find you, Doug, if they want to work with you or if they want to learn a bit more about yourself?
Okay, so my website is www.surebetshr, so surebetts.hr.com. They can sign up for free on there to just get weekly updates from me. They can see the services I offer. They can get in touch for a free, no obligation chat. And there's also links on there to my 10-week leadership program I talked about as well. And I also give freebies away from there. So instant PDFs on things like how to take on your first employees if you've never done that before, top 10 mistakes managers make, and how to fix them. And there's also a link there to my book as well about going from a new line manager to a great people leader. So there's lots of resources on there. A lot of them are free as well. So yeah, I just encourage people to look me up and also get in touch with me on social media as well.
No worries. I'll make sure I put the link in the show notes for people to find you. What kind of social media do you use? Is it pretty much all of them, or?
Pretty much all of them, but I am predominantly on LinkedIn in terms of updates and posts, so that's a good one to follow me on.
No problem. No problem. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. I'm going to end the show here, Doug. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we say goodbye?
Okay, well, it's been a good discussion, Aaron, so thank you for that. We've covered all sorts of areas in the time, but I think for me, my advice comes back to business owners that say, don't leave it to Google, ask an expert for anything you need. Don't be afraid to ask questions you're not sure of, and make sure you get the best experience for your employees that you can, because it will save you time and money down the line.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming on, Doug. Really appreciate you being here. There's some really interesting points that's come out of it, so I really appreciate that.
All right, thanks, Aaron.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye.